They laughed at the human maid until she saved the alien princess from Elite Guard's greatest failure. Mira Calloway had cleaned up a lot of things in her life. Vomit. Spilled wine. The occasional dead houseplant nobody wanted to admit they'd killed. But nothing quite prepared her for cleaning up after a species that considered eye contact a formal declaration of war. "Human," said the guard, in the tone people usually reserve for talking to particularly slow dogs. "You missed a spot." Mira looked at the floor. The floor was, in fact, spotless. It gleamed like the guard's ego. "Wow," she said. "Your eyesight really is legendary. They should put that on a recruitment poster." The guard, a 7-foot slab of muscle and chitinous plating named Threx, who she was fairly sure had never lost a fight or won an argument, narrowed all 4 of his eyes at her. "Humans," he said to his squad mate, like she wasn't standing right there. "Soft. Slow. Good only for scrubbing floors and folding linens." "And yet," Mira said sweetly, "here I am, doing your job for you, because apparently, Elite Honor Guard means standing around looking pretty while the help does the actual work." Threx didn't laugh. Elite Vashkar Honor Guard didn't really do laughing. But his squad mate made a sound like a dying kettle, which she'd learned was the closest thing to a snicker their species could manage. Mira smiled, picked up her cleaning cart, and walked away before they could think of a comeback. Which, given the collective intellectual horsepower of the Honor Guard, would take a while. Life below deck on the Thesha's Crown ran on a schedule as rigid as the ship's chrome corridors. Wake before the nobles. Clean before the nobles noticed anything was dirty. Vanish before the nobles remembered you existed. It was, Mira thought, remarkably similar to being a ghost, except ghosts probably got dental. Humanity's grand entrance onto the galactic stage hadn't gone quite the way anyone back home imagined. No triumphant first contact fleet, no seat at the diplomatic table. Just centuries of being quietly, politely informed that humans were useful, in the same way a good broom is useful. So here she was, 3 years into a contract nobody back home fully understood, mopping floors on an alien pleasure cruiser the size of a small city. It wasn't glamorous. But it paid well, and more importantly, it let her watch. That was the part nobody clocked about her. The guards saw a maid. The nobles saw furniture with opinions. Nobody looked twice at the woman restocking towels near the security consoles, half listening to shift changes, memorizing patrol gaps like other people memorized song lyrics. Old habits. Expensive ones to unlearn. Princess Isandra Velkorathis was the only one who ever looked at her twice. Not with contempt, not with the vague disinterest of the rest of the court, but with the sharp, cataloging gaze of someone who'd been trained since birth to notice weakness in a room. She'd caught Mira once, watching the guards instead of scrubbing the console she was supposedly polishing. "You're not actually cleaning that," the princess had said. "I'm mentally cleaning it," Mira replied. Very therapeutic. Isandra hadn't smiled. Vashkar royalty rarely did. But something in her eyes had flickered, filed away for later. The Honor Guard, to their credit, were very good at looking intimidating. Full ceremonial armor, weapons that hummed with barely restrained lethality, a collective aura of "do not test us." Unfortunately, looking intimidating and being competent were, Mira had discovered, entirely separate skill trees, and the Vashkar Honor Guard had put every point into the former. She'd watched them run a security drill 2 weeks earlier. An actual, scheduled, everyone knows it's coming drill. They still managed to leave a maintenance hatch on deck 4 completely unmonitored for 11 minutes because 2 of them got into an argument about whose turn it was to check it. Nobody died. Nobody even noticed. They laughed it off in the mess hall afterward, slapping each other's carapaces, congratulating themselves on a job well done. Mira, mopping nearby, said nothing. She just remembered. Because that's the thing about being invisible. People stop performing for you. They stop pretending to be competent, and you get to see exactly how competent they actually are. Spoiler, not very. The trouble started during the Concordance Gala, a diplomatic function so stiff and self-important that Mira half expected the champagne to file paperwork before being poured. Dignitaries from 6 systems, all dressed like they'd lost a bet with a chandelier, all pretending to like each other for exactly as long as the cameras were rolling. She was refilling glasses near the East Promenade when the lights stuttered. Just once. Just a flicker. Anyone else would have blamed the wiring. Mira put the tray down. 3 seconds later, the actual alarms went off, and the room exploded into the kind of chaos that only happens when several hundred heavily armed, deeply overconfident people all try to be the hero at the same time. Guests screamed. Guards shouted contradictory orders. Somewhere, a very expensive ice sculpture of the Vashkar royal crest toppled over and shattered, which felt, to Mira, like the appropriate metaphor for the evening. Infiltrators. Half a dozen, maybe more, dressed as catering staff, which was either extremely clever or extremely insulting, depending on how you looked at it. They moved fast, cutting toward the dais where the royal family stood. And in the scrum, in the shoving, screaming, utterly useless panic of 200 elites who had never once had to think on their feet, Princess Isandra vanished from her guard's side. Nobody noticed for almost a full minute. Mira noticed in 4 seconds. Here is a fun fact about elite honor guards, Mira thought, watching Threx and his squad draw weapons and start shouting orders at each other instead of, say, finding the missing princess. They are extremely good at looking like they know what they're doing. It's the actual doing part where things fall apart. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have armor. She had a beverage tray, a maintenance keycard she absolutely was not supposed to still have access to, and roughly a decade of very specific experience that her employment contract had conveniently never asked her about. Nobody asks the maid where she learned to move quietly through crowds. Nobody asks why she flinches less than everyone else when things go loud. That's the beauty of being furniture. Nobody's curious about the furniture's past. She dropped the tray and moved. She found Isandra pinned in a service alcove off the East Promenade, cornered by 2 of the infiltrators, looking furious in the specific way of someone who has never once in her life been made to feel powerless and deeply resents the experience. "Move," Mira said, "and try not to scream. Screaming is very on brand for tonight, but it won't help. Do you have any idea who I?" "Princess." "Yes." "Wonderful. Royalty." "Later." Mira grabbed her wrist and hauled her sideways through a service door that, as far as the ship's official schematics were concerned, didn't exist in any capacity worth guarding. Behind them, one of the infiltrators shouted. Boots pounded. "This corridor isn't on any map," Isandra said, breathless, as they ducked through a gap barely wide enough for her ceremonial gown. "That's because your honor guard considers maintenance access beneath them," Mira said. "Real shame, that. Would have been useful information right about now. You know this ship better than my own security detail." "I clean it, Your Highness." "Cleaning requires actually going places. Guarding, apparently, does not." The chase that followed was, in Myra's professional opinion, deeply undignified for everyone involved except her. She led the princess through cramped service shafts, past humming coolant pipes, down a laundry chute that made Isandra shriek in a way no royal transcript would ever record accurately. Twice she used a fire suppression canister as an improvised smoke bomb. Once she jammed a mop handle through a door mechanism, buying maybe 90 seconds while 2 infiltrators swore at it on the other side in a language she didn't speak but whose tone required no translation. "You do this often?" Isandra gasped, ducking under a low pipe. "Every Tuesday. Keeps me limber." "I'm serious." "So am I, mostly." Mira paused at a junction, listening. Footsteps, left corridor, closing fast. "This way." "How do you know?" Because your guards designed this ship's security around people attacking from the front, in a straight line, politely. Nobody accounted for the laundry routes. They broke into a wider maintenance bay just as 3 of the honor guard finally caught up, Threx among them, weapon drawn, Faye somewhere between fury and confusion at finding his princess being led by the arm through a service tunnel by the woman he'd mocked 2 weeks earlier for missing a spot on a spotless floor. Princess. Stand back, we. The infiltrators burst in behind them before he could finish the sentence, and what followed could generously be described as a firefight and less generously as 3 overconfident soldiers walking directly into an ambush because they'd charged in without checking the room first. Weapons fire scorched the walls. Threx took a glancing hit and went down cursing. His squad mates scattered for cover that didn't exist, because nobody had thought to actually clear the bay before storming in. Mira grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall, pulled the pin, and hosed the nearest infiltrator directly in the face. He staggered, blinded, and she swept his legs with the mop she was, for reasons she couldn't entirely explain to future generations, still carrying. Somebody's greatest failure, she muttered, is really coming in clutch tonight. The lead infiltrator was smarter than the rest, hanging back, directing the chaos rather than wading into it, which made him significantly more dangerous and significantly more annoying. He caught Issandra's arm during the confusion and dragged her back, a short blade suddenly at her throat, and every guard in the room froze the way people do when the situation goes from manageable to actively terrible. Everyone stays very still, he said, in decent but heavily accented Vashkar. Big talk, Mira said, from a guy who let himself get cornered next to a coolant valve. His eyes flicked to her. Confused. Which was, honestly, the reaction she got most often, right before things went badly for whoever was underestimating her. You are a servant. I contain multitudes. She reached behind her, casual as anything, and cranked the coolant valve wide open. Freezing vapor hissed out in a dense cloud, and for one disorienting second, visibility dropped to nothing. It was enough. Isandra, trained since childhood in exactly the kind of self-defense her guards apparently never expected her to need, drove an elbow back into her captor's ribs the moment his grip loosened in surprise. He staggered. Mira was already moving, closing the distance through the mist, and drove the fire extinguisher, because apparently that was just her weapon of choice tonight, directly into the side of his head. He dropped like a bad first impression. The mist cleared. Silence settled over the bay, broken only by groaning infiltrators, groaning guards, and one deeply embarrassed Threx trying to stand up with dignity while soaking wet from fire-suppressant foam. Isandra straightened her torn gown, breathing hard, and looked at Mira with an expression that had absolutely nothing left in it of the polite disinterest from before. You didn't have to do any of that. No, Mira agreed. I could have kept mopping. But you looked like you were having a rough night. The official report, when it eventually surfaced, credited the elite Vashkar honor guard with neutralizing the threat to Princess Isandra Vel Korathis. Mira read it once, in the break room, and laughed hard enough that another maid asked if she was choking. The unofficial version, the one that actually spread through the ship in the following days, was rather different. It was the one told by guests who'd been at the gala, by guards too embarrassed to correct it, and most importantly, by Isandra herself, who stood in front of the entire assembled honor guard 3 days later and said, quite loudly, quite deliberately, that she owed her life not to the elite soldiers sworn to protect her, but to the human maid they'd spent months mocking for being soft. Threx, to his credit, had the good grace to look like he wanted the floor to swallow him. She used a fire extinguisher, he said weakly, to no one in particular. And a mop, Isandra added. Don't forget the mop. Mira went back to cleaning, because contracts were contracts and somebody still had to deal with the champagne stains. But something had shifted. The guards didn't sneer anymore. They watched her now, carefully, the way you watch something you've badly underestimated once and have no intention of underestimating again. Threx approached her a week later while she was polishing a console she was absolutely definitely, mentally cleaning. You missed a spot, he said. Mira looked at him. He almost smiled. Almost. I'm aware, she said. I left it there for you. Bit of practice. You'll need it. He made the dying kettle sound. She decided to take it as a win.